Welcome to part 3 of the Second World War. Now we're going to talk about the rise of Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was a little bit younger than Mussolini. He was born on April 20th, 1889. He was born in Braunau on Inn, which is in Austria, right? He in 1905 had moved to Vienna. His intent at that time was actually to become an artist. He had applied for the Academy of Fine Arts. He actually will be rejected by the Academy twice. They will reject him based on their decision on his quote unfitness for painting, right? If you've ever seen any of his artwork, you certainly would understand why. It looks more like architectural drawings than it does painting. They're all very lifeless, right? When World War I broke out, he was actually very enthusiastic about World War I, but he had no intention of serving under the Austrian-Hungarian army. He did not see himself as an Austrian. He saw himself as a German. So he went to Bavaria. He went to Munich, where he joined the Reichswehr, right, the German army, right. He is going to actually serve with great distinction in World War I. He's going to reach only the rank of Gefreiter, which is just corporal again. Seems to be a theme there, right? But he is going to be wounded 2 times during the war. He was a message runner, which was a very dangerous job, right? He was hit during the Battle of the Somme on October 7th, 1916. He was hit by a shell fragment. Also on October 14th, 1918, 2 years later, apparently October wasn't a good year for him. He was wounded again when he was hit with a British gas shell. Matter of fact, he was actually in the hospital recovering from the blindness caused from the gas when the war had ended. Now, according to his own writings, he said he was immediately struck blind again, but that's clearly probably just Hitler bravado going on right there. When the war ended, he stayed in the Reichswehr, stayed in the army, now under the Weimar Republic, and he was sent back to Bavaria, where he had enlisted. And his job he was tasked for with the Reichswehr was to infiltrate and keep an eye on these radical reformist groups that were forming all over Germany, but specifically here in the South, where he was sent, right? These radical socialist groups, right? One of them that Hitler was sent to infiltrate and spy on was called the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, right, or the German Workers' Party, the DAP. He liked it so much that he joined it on September 12, 1919. And then he eventually rose to run it very quickly, rose to become the head of it, and he changed its name. He renamed it the National Sozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, right? Or the NSDAP, or if you really want a shorter version of that, Nazi, right? The Nazi Party. And from that point then, he begins to look on how he can overthrow this very unstable Weimar government and replace it, of course, with the Nazis and himself at the head. His first attempt to do this will actually be a disaster, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. In 1923, the German economy is going to collapse. Remember, I said that the Depression didn't start in 1929, right? For Germany, you're going to have economic instability for the entirety of the interwar years, right? But in 1923, it was really bad. The Deutschmark began to fall against the other world currencies. At the beginning of the year, the Deutschmark was worth 1 American dollar would buy 18,000 Deutschmarks. So it was 18,000 Deutschmarks to the dollar. That's pretty bad. By July, 160,000 Deutschmarks to 1 US dollar. By August, 1 million Deutschmarks to the dollar. By November, 4 billion Deutschmarks to the dollar. The Deutschmark had become so devalued that it actually made more sense to take stacks of Deutschmarks and burn them for heat, because that would generate more heat than the amount of wood it could purchase, right? Hitler and his Nazi party saw this as an opportunity to strike, right? His plan, the Nazi plan here was simple. Keep playing simple, right? Kidnap the leaders of the Bavarian government and force them at gunpoint to acknowledge Adolf Hitler as their leader. See? Simple. Win over the army with the aid of a World War I veteran and war hero General Erich Ludendorff, who at this time was, I mean, he was there, but at this time he had reached a point in his age where he was just kind of doddering. You know, he may have had dementia. He was never, you know, there's no diagnosis to back that up, right? But he may have had some kind of dementia or maybe Alzheimer's, some such thing, right? Once you've done that, then you proclaim a nationwide revolt to overthrow the Weimar Republic. The government falls in Berlin. Hitler takes charge. See, simple. It doesn't work out that way, right? The rebellion is a failure. The army does not support the Nazis. A firefight breaks out in Munich. A person standing right next to Adolf Hitler actually is hit and killed by a bullet, so missed it by that much, right? Hitler is arrested, and he's sentenced to 5 years in prison. And it's in prison where he's going to write, Landsberg prison, where he's going to write his book, or at least he's going to dictate his book, Mein Kampf, right? If anybody ever had any questions on what Hitler's intentions were, well, it's written in Mein Kampf. So Hitler has come to realize that a military overthrow, a military coup, is not how he's going to be able to obtain power. So he begins to look for another way. Now, initially, the Nazi Party was banned, but it won't be long before you'll get that ban lifted. Hitler will only spend 9 months of that 5-year term in prison. He'll very quickly begin to consolidate in power the Nazis again, and he begins to take a look at gaining political offices, right? Gaining seats in the Reichstag, which was the German parliament, right? Getting power for the Nazis so that eventually he could become chancellor and then ultimately president, right? Now, the president of Germany at the time is Paul von Hindenburg. The president is effectively the executive of the country, while the chancellor is effectively the head of the Reichstag, the parliament. It'd be the equivalent of being Senate pro tem, I guess, would be the closest American equivalent I'd come up with, and that's a little bit loose. Okay, so by January of 1933, January 30th, after a lot of political wrangling and a lot of slow growth in Nazi power in Germany, and of course, bad economy has helped this, Paul von Hindenburg is going to summon Hitler to his office and swear him in as chancellor, right? Hitler is going to very quickly begin consolidating this power, right? Now, he's told to have, again, a coalition around him where he wasn't even allowed to have the Nazis have a majority, right? But he orchestrates an incident known as the Reichstag fire. On February 27th, 1933, less than a month after he's taken the chancellorship, a fire will break out in the Reichstag. It'll be blamed on the communists, but it was all probably actually set by Hermann Goering, who was one of Hitler's right-hand men in the Nazi Party. Okay. As a result, though, he gets the Reichstag to pass the Reichstag fire decree. Full name was the Order of the Reichspräsident for the Protection of the People and the State, which nullified many civil liberties and began Hitler's consolidation of power under the chancellorship, to where he pretty much, the Reichstag didn't have any point of meeting after the Reichstag decree, right? The next step he took is he began doing some of the things that we'll talk about later. He began to persecute some of these groups that he's already targeted in books like Mein Kampf. The Dachau, the first concentration camp, will be open. And remember, this is not a death facility. This is a concentration camp. This is all going to go through stages. Okay. Ultimately, there will be people who will die in Dachau and be placed in ovens and stuff like that, but we're not there yet. Okay. On June 30th, 1934, he decides that he needs to consolidate his power inside the Nazi Party itself, and he orchestrates an incident that goes from June 30th to July 2nd, known as the Night of the Long Knives. Here, he is going to purge any of his opponents internally, including a man named Ernst Röhm, who was the head of the SA, or the Brown Shirts, right? They were a paramilitary group inside the Nazi Party. Ernst Röhm was going to be a threat, and so he eliminated him. Finally, on August 2nd, 1934, President Hindenburg dies. When that happens, Hitler replaces him in the office of the presidency. He puts out a plebiscite, a vote, saying that should we combine the presidency and the chancellorship into one office, which, of course, the people do. And now that he's done this, he has solidified his dictatorship, and he's going to, well, like Mussolini, begin orchestrating his plans to take over the world.